It's John 21, 15 through 25. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said. "You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all the things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." "Very truly I tell you, when you were younger you dressed yourself and went where you wanted, but when you are old you will stretch out your hands and someone will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, "Follow me." Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved was following him. This was the one who had leaned back against Jesus at the supper and had said, "Lord, who is going to betray you?" When Peter saw him, he asked, "Lord, what about him?" Jesus answered, "If I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You must follow me." Because of this rumor spread among the believers that this disciple would not die. But Jesus did not say that he would not die. He only said, "If I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you?" This is the disciple who testifies to these things and who wrote them down. We know that his testimony is true. Jesus did many other things as well. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room for the books that would be written. All right. I'm not talking anymore, thank God.
You nailed it. All right. I'm going to clean up a little bit here. Hold on. All right. All right. Everybody good? Hi. Hi. Okay. Y'all, this is the last, this is the end of John, of the Gospel of John. This is the end of it. Surprise. So for those of you who need closure, I'm sorry. This is it. This is all you're going to get. But yeah, there's a lot. It's basically, so this whole chapter 21, there's a lot of debate about it. The story, the Gospel of John, really ends at the end of chapter 20. It ends right there. It says, it sort of comes to a closure, and it sort of lays it all out. And then there's this like sort of addendum on the end, and there's some loose pieces, like loose ends that haven't been tied up. And so what New Testament scholars sort of believe happened is there were some rumors that had popped up. One of them is mentioned here. There are some questions about Peter and about the beloved disciple. It appears that they both have died. And there's some questions about why and how. And there's also questions about Peter. I mean, there's a lot of, if you really think about it, there's a lot of things that remain unanswered by the time we get to the end of chapter 20. One of them is like, what happens to Peter after his denial? Like, he never comes back. And yet, the early church revered Peter for being like this really great leader. But the last thing they see in the book of John is Peter's denying 3 times and then hanging out with a bunch of Roman soldiers by the fire, warming himself up. And it's sort of like this dark scene, like he's crossed over to the other side and he's denied Jesus. And so one of the questions people would have is, upon reading and hearing John's gospel read out loud, is like, why is he seen as such a prominent figure in the church today when the last time we saw him, he was abandoning Jesus? So there's some area to fill in there. Also, what about the disciple that Jesus loved? What happens to him? Also, who is it? Why doesn't it say? If the story really ended well and the kingdom of God is growing and God did God's work, then why is there suffering about the time that this is written? Why are the Christians still suffering? Why haven't they found their way? Why don't they have their kingdom? There's just all kinds of open ends that need to be closed and tied up. And so this passage, chapter 21, does some of the work. You can tell by the end of the text here, in verse 25, Jesus did many other things as well. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room for the books that would be written. Apparently, they're sitting on a lot of extra material as well, and some of those pieces were used and put here. There's lots of stories about Jesus. Papyri is only so long and very expensive. And so people are choosy. And it seems like they went back at the end and took 2 more stories and put them in, stories that were part of the community that had been collected. And so again, yeah, Peter is the first one that has a lot of loose ends that need to be tied up. Because Peter, even, if you grew up in the Catholic Church, they would have taught you that Peter was the first pope, right? I mean, there's really a lot of things that happened before Peter. There's like 300 years between Peter and the establishment of the Catholic Church. But like everyone reveres Peter, and yet Peter's story ends sort of in sorrow. But not just that, it ends in disloyalty and dishonor, because in a first century Roman culture, they are living in this honor system where insults like Peter's, like denying the person that you have been following publicly like that, is an incredible insult. And he does it 3 times. And it's a grave offense to publicly act disloyal, especially 3 times. And so there's probably a lot of questions that the community has in an honor culture. By the way, we're sort of moving towards, America has sort of like moved towards an honor culture over time, especially over the last couple of decades, to a place where sort of it doesn't matter about somebody's morals, it's whether or not they're loyal to you, right? And whether or not they badmouth you. They can badmouth anybody but not you. And offenses need to be sort of dealt with really harshly, and they come crawling back and apologize. It has nothing to do with morals. It has a lot to do with loyalty. And this is the world that they were growing up in. They had been discipled by the Roman Empire, very honor system, very status-based. And so when you see Peter do something like this would have been really offensive to all of them. And so the question would be, how is Jesus going to respond to this type of dishonor? This is a conversation that doesn't happen in the book until the very end here. Because Jesus is dishonored several times by Judas, by others. And there's this conversation that needs to be had about what is Jesus going to do to this type of dishonor? Can he let offenses like this slide? Because whatever Jesus would do, the community can learn to do. And I'm sure they dealt with sort of similar things in their day. They're living in a time when there is persecution, and so I imagine there's a lot of people who are denying Christ just to get along, and there's probably a lot of questions about, okay, so these people who did the Peter thing, Peter got welcomed back. How do we welcome back those who sort of betrayed our community to take care of themselves, and who go along to get along? You know what I mean? To not make noise, to not end up in difficulty, to not lose money. What do we do? And so I want to address this part first, the part where, hold on a second. I forgot to get my little, hey, go ahead and throw up the first slide here. Oh, I got it. Okay, here we are. So it says, Peter turned and saw, wait, no, hold on. I'm sorry. I had my phone in my pocket, and I think it hit a couple slides while I was going here. And let me just talk amongst yourselves. We're fine. We're fine. We are fine. I'm perfectly comfortable in awkward social settings. I'm actually the one that brings the awkward to the social setting. Okay. This is not the right thing here. Hold on a second. I'm getting there. My slides got out of order. Okay. I'm just going to start here. I may be jumping around. We'll deal with it. It's summer. You know what I mean? It's ordinary time. Okay. So it starts off, I want to look at verse 15. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Okay, first off, do you love me more than these? Why is he saying more than these? Because remember, right before, this is like a reversal of the meal, the Passover meal that happened before. At that Passover meal, Jesus tells Peter, you're going to deny me 3 times. And he says basically like, yo, all else will deny you. Everyone else will. I love you more than they do, and I will never deny you. Okay? Jesus brings this right back up, right up front. Peter, who has denied me 3 times now, do you still think you love me more than everyone else? Yes, Lord, he said. You know that I love you. And Jesus said, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The 3rd time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him a 3rd time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things, and you know that I love you. And Jesus said, feed my sheep. So there's several things here, and you can do like 4 sermons on this whole thing. I'm not going to do that. But this whole idea, like feed my sheep, the way that he's saying, if you want to show that you love me, it's not by this loyalty thing. It's not by confessing it with your mouth. It's take care of other people. If people are hungry, you feed them. If they're naked, you clothe them. If they're lonely, you befriend them. Love is an action. It's a verb. And the way we love Jesus is by loving other people. And so there's something else here going on too, though, where the scene sort of mirrors, again, the 3 denials. They're at dinner, just like before. They went from dinner to 3 denials. They went to a garden, took a walk in a garden, and there were 3 denials. Here, they're at dinner, around a campfire, and they're eating fish that Jesus made, and probably the best fish ever. And they're they're sitting around and they're talking to Jesus, and they've just eaten a meal, and Jesus looks at him and he asks him, 3 times, "Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me?" And he sort of asks them, the first one mentions how he had said he loved Jesus more than the rest. And so what he's sort of doing is, it's sort of a literary device that works backwards to one by one erase the offense that Peter had committed against Jesus. And in the very end, because the entire audience would have been like riveted by this part, because how do you restore somebody who's betrayed you in this way? And the last part, let me underline something if it works here. Yeah, right here. Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the 3rd time. So this is he is being sufficiently shamed for the audience, and he feels hurt. And all sort of like the methods by which people are made whole and reconciled, and they make things right. All of that is going on here. And so this is sort of like for the audience to sort of let them be at ease that, like, no, Jesus sees, and Jesus has erased Peter's offenses against him. And I mean, the big deal here is not, oftentimes we focus on things like the words Jesus used for love, because he uses a couple different words for love, but honestly, that happens all through the Gospel of John. I don't think it's anything special. It's the words that he used there to describe the different types of love. It constantly is happening through the Gospel. These words for love are just being sort of used synonymously and thrown around. I don't think that's the focus. And I don't think the focus is on Peter defending himself and 3 times saying this. I think the focus is on Jesus. I think the whole idea of this passage being here is so that we can see what it looks like when somebody has been like deeply betrayed at his darkest hour by his closest friend. And then how do you come back from this? How do you bring somebody back? It's the kind of thing that if you think about it, what Jesus has been making space this whole time for people who we don't make space for. He's made space in the community for beggars. He's made space for handicapped people, some of which he healed, for ideological enemies like Samaritans. He went and found their like arch ideological enemies and reconciled with them, befriended them, and brought some of them in. In the early church of John was known for bringing in Samaritans. That's one of the things that got him in trouble and got him kicked out of the synagogues. You even have these sort of, in the structural system where these political leaders were, there was a couple of people here and there that recognized corruption and that thought maybe bad decisions were being made. And Jesus welcomes them to the table, even though they're in power, even though they're wealthy, like Nicodemus, who becomes a devout follower of Jesus. Very well may have been a leader in the early church as well. And so you have the lowest of the low, and you have the highest of the high, all being welcomed. Jesus is welcoming everyone from every walk of life to the table. He makes space for everyone. And now at the very, very end, sort of the question that was floating in the air is, but betrayal. Can Jesus make space for betrayal? Can he welcome people back who have gone this far? And so it's the kind of thing that you don't think you can do until you do it, and then you find out that you can do it. But it's a very difficult thing to do. It's very hard. It takes a lot of emotional support. It takes a really strong heart. It takes a lot of healing because people hurt you. And it's the kind of thing where, like, you have to experience that type of deep reconciliation with somebody in order to know that it's possible. There was somebody who worked for me 15 years ago, close friend. We grew up together. We went to school together, went to college together, different places. He was at my wedding. And we worked together here for a while. He got hired. And it just went really, really bad, as working with friends sometimes does. It went really bad. And by the end of it, it was sort of this deep betrayal that I experienced, and he disappeared, sort of blew a bunch of things up and disappeared. Long time ago, a lot of random details. But like about 6 or 7 years later, he showed up at service and came walking in, and I was over here somewhere. The service was over, and I saw him, and I was like, well, this is hard. What do you do with this? What do you do with someone who hurt you so badly standing across the room from you? And there's nothing else I could do. And so I would just walked up to him, and I smiled, and I just put up my arms, and he put out his arms and gave me a really, really big hug. And we just moved forward. It was sort of this moment where, like, you don't really believe that sort of like deep wounds can be filled by the same person who cut them. You know what I mean? But it happens. And there was this sort of moment of like deep reconciliatory love that took very little words, a couple of looks with the eyes, some body gestures, an embrace, a posture of like, it's you and it's me. It's okay. And I think oftentimes people need to see, we wonder like the old what would Jesus do question when you give people like Peter, who Jesus taught for 3 years, who raised him up, who taught him, who told him exactly how it's going to go, and then he did. And he gives him an opportunity to clear the slate and start over. And that's a huge deal. It's a very, very difficult thing to do. And Jesus shows us how to do it. And it's this reminder that, I mean, even Paul, this passage came to mind, so I threw it up here. Paul in Romans 12 is writing to a church of people that have been deeply offended. There's 2 different groups in the church in Rome. And each of them has deeply offended each other. And they're trying to figure out how to live at peace with each other. And Paul writes to them, he's like, look, what is your responsibility? How can you keep on your side hatred and bitterness from flowing over that line towards them? What can you do? Is there some posture you can take? And he says, if it is possible, as far as it depends upon you, live at peace with everyone else. Whatever it is that you can do to push it towards peace, do it. No antagonism. Not holding on to bitterness. No jabs. No trying to like dredge up the past and throw it at them. He says, whatever it is you can do. And this is to Paul. Paul believes like you have a responsibility to this thing. Yes, of course they do, but you can't control that. All you can do is control yours. And so I know it's not always possible, but perhaps to the best of our ability, we can agree to try and to exercise the muscle of reconciliation. This is the mission that God has given us. To grow more conciliatory over time as we get older. To grow more conciliatory, more merciful, not less. Not harder of heart, but softer of heart. Learning to repair. All of this is the work of the church. And so this is the first conversation that happens here. There are 2 conversations. There's one about Peter being reconciled. And then there's another conversation about death. We get a bit of a future about Peter. We get some future about the beloved disciple. And there's a lot of questions you can tell have been swirling around this. Both the main protagonists sort of get a word about their future in order to address a couple of sort of apparent matters of discussion. And so let's look at verse 18 here. There it says this, very truly I tell you. So this is Jesus talking to Peter now. When you were younger, you dressed yourself and you went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hand and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. And then he said to him, follow me. So, this is another sort of loose end to tie up because Peter is well known as a martyr in the early church. We don't really know what happened or how he was killed. In the 4th century, maybe late 3rd century, their writings begin to pop up about how he was crucified. And one of the writings says he was crucified upside down, like he was going to be crucified, but then he said, I'm not worthy to die like my Lord did. So they turned him upside down and crucified him upside down. Those are like 300 years later, and I'm not saying they're not true. I'm just saying they're 300 years later. But like we do have one of the writings of a man named Clement of Rome who wrote within a couple of years of Peter's death and literally wrote this within 5 years of the Gospel of John being written. And he mentions Peter being killed. He says, Peter endured not 1 or 2, but many sufferings, and having thus borne witness, went to the place of glory that was due to him. So Clement basically tells us this man, for the rest of his life, suffered over and over and over again and was eventually killed for professing allegiance to Jesus instead of Caesar. And so, we don't know what happened, but Peter was executed for what he calls having borne witness. And that means he likely publicly declared that his allegiance to Jesus in a public place. The same thing he refused to do after Jesus was arrested. He finds the strength later on in life to say, there is nothing you can do to make me not be honest about my allegiance to Jesus as my king, as opposed to Caesar. And they kill him for it. He's executed. He declares allegiance to Jesus when questioned by Roman authorities at some point about his allegiance to Caesar, and he denies allegiance to Caesar, confesses allegiance to Jesus, and is executed by the Roman Empire. Now, that's Peter. That's what happens to Peter. It appears as if Peter has died, and the audience of John's gospel knows that he is dead, and he's grabbing some words of Jesus and putting them in there at the end as an addendum. Chapter 21 is sort of an addendum later on. We don't know how much later. Maybe a few years. Maybe longer. We don't know. But it's sort of placed there to address the death of Peter. But also there's another thing. The other guy, the beloved apostle, whom we oftentimes refer to as John. We're pretty sure it's John. We don't really know for sure. But we have more. We have something about John here. And it says, Peter, as they're talking, Peter turns, and he saw the disciple whom Jesus loved was following them. This was the one who leaned back against Jesus at the supper and had said, Lord, who is going to betray you? And when Peter saw him, he asked, Lord, what about him? And Jesus said, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You must follow me. Because of this, the rumor spread among the believers that this disciple would not die, but Jesus did not say that he would not die. So there's an argument here. He only said, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? So obviously, there is a rumor flying around that the beloved disciple wasn't supposed to die. And everyone believes this. Why? Because apparently Jesus said something, and people heard it and had passed it along. And apparently Jesus had told the beloved disciple, had told Peter, if I want the beloved disciple to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? Okay? But John, the writer of the book, I'm just going to say John, whatever, wants you to know, very important that you know, but Jesus did not say that. Jesus did not say that he would not die. He only said if I want him to remain alive. So he's like correcting some like rumors that have spread and gone different directions and are flying around. And so like, it's a great little addition sort of to the book. It's a great little piece because there's all these like sort of loose end things that need to be tied up. I mean, we don't even, again, I've said it several times, we don't even know for sure who wrote the book that we call John's Gospel. Like Leo mentioned last week, Leo's pretty convinced that it's Lazarus because he literally, and there's a lot of scholars that argue this. There's actually a lot of textual evidence for this. I'm not going that direction. But he shows up right after Lazarus is raised from the dead. Jesus is known to have been very close to Lazarus. It would also make sense that they wouldn't think he would die because Jesus raised him from the dead. You know what I mean? Like, why would he die again? He just raised it. It's fixed it. It's fixed. It's going to run forever. And so, you know, Leo mentioned last week, he leads towards it being Lazarus and not John. It's entirely possible. All of it's possible. And here's my thing. Here's my thing about the Gospel of John. The ambiguity is deliberate. Do you think the author wrote this entire thing and accidentally forgot to put the name of the person in? At no point did anyone reading this go, who are you talking about anyways? You just keep calling him the beloved disciple. Why don't you give him a name? Never gives him a name. Like, but do you really think the author forgot to mention the major protagonist in the story? Also, don't you think the author knows that they didn't put the name in there and went to great lengths to specifically avoid putting the name in there on purpose? Obviously. Also, don't you think that the author knows that people are going to wonder when they read the book, who is he talking about? Who's the beloved disciple? The author knows people are going to ask the question. The author doesn't seem to care. The author just keeps moving, and it's almost like it's a design, sort of a literary device he puts in there, because it's a whole conversation that could have easily been cleared up by adding one word to the book. And yet this has been debated. Even in the early church, this was debated. Like, who is it? Is it Lazarus? Is it John? And so first off, I would say two things about this. I think you're intended to wonder because I think you're intended to argue because I think you're intended to look at it from different perspectives. And there are some people who were dead and lost, and God brought them back in life. and they're going to believe it's Lazarus because that's their story. And there are other people who have done nothing wrong. They've just tried to live a devout life, and they've never done anything. They've never really accomplished anything special, but they know that they're loved by God, and that's their only identity, like we talked about before. And they're going to need it to be John. And I'm fine with that. And here's the thing. For me personally, the author isn't obviously trying to control what you think. If the author wanted you to think it was somebody in particular, they would have told you who to think it was. But they also, the New Testament is in general not trying to control what you think. It's trying to control what you feel. It's trying to open you up. So here's what I see. My personal opinion on this whole thing is that the Gospel of John is written so that the readers can see themselves when they read the book as the beloved disciples, so that you can read the book and you can see somebody who is just present in the story, leaning on Jesus' chest during a meal, just feeling loved, not interacting, and that is you. And you're watching the disciples go, and you're watching these things happen, and you can see these things play out in real time. You have friends who betray you. You have friends who ask different questions and wander off. There's a Judas. There's a Peter. There's some really devout people. They're all there. And you're in this story, and you're trying to follow Jesus. And so the Bible is sort of this exercise in transformational reading. It's not a Wikipedia page where you're just supposed to memorize all the details. You're supposed to read it in a way that it opens you up to where you meditate upon the story and upon the characters and upon the world they're living in. And you imagine the connections that it has with your world and what you're going through. And so there is this exercise in reading the Gospel of John where you aren't given a name on purpose, because maybe you need to imagine yourself in the presence of Jesus going through this for a while, because maybe you are right now in the presence of Jesus going through some very similar things. And you're being asked about your allegiance, and you're being asked about the amount of guilt and shame that you maybe carry from times that you've turned your back on what you knew you were supposed to do. But also you're watching God bring people just like you back into the fold and welcome them in and forgive them. All of this is an exercise. You don't read the Bible for information. You read it to be opened up. And so there's one sort of last thing that I see that I wanted to talk about here. And it is about Peter again, and it's about sort of the two decisions that he made. Before he saw Jesus suffer, before he saw someone stand on principle, refuse to honor Caesar, love all the unlovable people that Rome hated, practice loving religion and spirituality in a way that the religious leaders hated. And until Peter saw Jesus do all of this and get killed for it, and the resurrection that came afterwards, and his whole mind being opened up to how the world actually works instead of how he thought it worked. We all are convinced most of our lives that the empire is right, that the best way to get peace is through strength, the best way to provide for people is by making a ton of money and then helping them out, by hoarding wealth. We all have these ideas about how the world works, but there's this moment where Peter's eyes are opened up to how the cosmos, all of creation actually works, which is that it runs on love. And that things are made right through love. And when Peter saw Jesus love all the way to death, it changed him. The first thing you see about Peter, like during these denials, the first Peter, he's very different. He's warming himself after he denies. He's trying to live. He's trying not to get punished. He's trying not to get arrested and get himself killed. And so he makes up a bunch of lies, and he hides, and he warms himself by these fires. And now we find him warming himself by Jesus' fire, having eaten a meal, and now confessing his love for Jesus over and over and over again. How, yes, I do love you, more than these even. And the difference between Peter before and Peter after is the journey that he's been on, what he has been able to see. Leo last week gave this quote by Barbara Brown Taylor, and I wrote as much of it down as I could, but it kept going, so I couldn't get all of it. And it went something like this: "We do not gain wisdom so that we can do the right thing. We gain wisdom by doing the right thing and observing the outcomes of doing so, whether success or failure." Yes, we make the path by walking it. That's how we make it. Peter saw something he had never seen. And before he saw someone so committed to the principle of standing on love, and dying for it. Before he saw this, he was unable to stand tall and follow Jesus in this way. But it is when we see sort of this kind of suffering, Peter becomes a whole other person. Clement tells us that Peter spent the rest of his life suffering over and over and over horrible things, and to the point where he was finally killed by the Roman Empire, by the soldiers. That is a different Peter. And what Peter saw was somebody actually walking the road. Did you know the vast majority of the writings of the church fathers, these people became church fathers after watching lowly Christians publicly executed for refusing to be allegiant to Caesar and for following Jesus? Over and over. Irenaeus, one of the church fathers, he writes about how he saw a Christian in the street brutally murdered after confessing his faith in Christ as his king rather than Caesar, and being disloyal to Caesar and loyal to Christ. And he watched this man get killed in the streets, and he basically in his heart said, whatever this guy has that he's willing to die for this, that's what I want. The martyrs made more Christians than any missionaries did. And so there's this gift that comes with the pain of suffering. Maybe not for the person who is suffering all the time, but sometimes there is. There is a gift, though, that comes from it, from doing what is right, where you awaken something inside of other people. There's always good fruit that arises from the ground where people suffer for doing good. We are humans, and the one universal human trait is that the suffering of another human, especially unjust suffering, it moves us to action. It changes us. Many of the leaders of the early church were inspired by the sufferings of the martyrs. The stories of those who suffered for good, it always inspires people and hardens their stance and their faith. And one of the most important things I think that we learn from the story of Jesus in the Gospel of John, if you're looking for one big overarching story, what you're going to see is this: the greatest movements of love in human history do not arise from among the wealthy, the successful, or the powerful, or the most charismatic people. In fact, that's where the most unjust and most violent things come from. Jesus himself said, is it not the rich who oppress you? The poor have no ability to oppress you. They have nothing. They have no power. The rich must make you afraid of them so that you'll torture them and get rid of them and hate them. But Jesus was very clear. It is the wealthy, it is the rich, it is the powerful who oppress you. It is nobody else. And the greatest movements of love in human history do not come from the top, ever. They never have. They are incapable of making things right. Every movement of love and goodness, the greatest movements of love in human history, arise in the aftermath of some person who sacrifices greatly for the good. We remember so many names that we bring up throughout the year: Oscar Romero, Martin Luther King, to name some more. And there are the deaths of recent protesters as well that stand up for good, people like Alex Preddy and Renee Good. When we see people acting out of love and dying or getting treated unjustly in some way, it awakens something within us. And one martyr creates 10,000 more soldiers every single time. And so Jesus himself, in John 15, the sort of the greatest passage of the whole book, he says, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for his friends. And we forget that Christianity itself is a movement that arose as a response to the execution of an innocent man by the hands of religious leaders who partnered with nationalistic authorities to maintain power and silence dissenting voices. It was Jesus. He was the one who was killed, who set off this whole thing. And so the way this book ends is, again, in ultimate love. It is even at the end of it, Jesus has been welcoming people the entire time, and he suffered greatly the entire time. And it ultimately ends in horrible suffering on a cross. And then later on we find them, the risen Lord, all of his disciples gathered on a beach, and there's this reconciliation that is still happening. Jesus is still offering it. He's welcoming them into a new world. He's telling them, I'm doing a new thing. There will be a new people in this world. The story is starting over. I'm still working. I'm still going to be present. And it's quite beautiful. So I think it doesn't end with some huge flash or some huge, climactic ending. It ends just with a conversation, with some reconciliation, and with some recognition that some will suffer, some will not. If you want to show love, feed my sheep. But above all, reconcile and keep carrying on the mission, the mission of reconciliation. So let's pray. Father, thank you for this place and these people. I pray that whatever we have taken from this book, from the writings of our ancient brothers and sisters, I pray that we would, next time we pick up this book and read it, that we would see all the beauty that we have pulled out of it. I pray that we would remember the journey of sort of awakening to what your kingdom looks like in this world and how it never really belongs, but eventually all will belong to it. Thank you, Father, for all of this. In your name, amen. Would you stand with me as we close out today by saying the Lord's Prayer like we do every week? Nice and loud for me. Come on. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen. Grace and peace. Have the greatest Sunday that you have ever had.